Hi, good evening, Anne Marie. How are you? Hold on.
Okay,
I have
now
to mute you. I can hear you. Yeah. Glad to see you and put a face to the emails.
yes. Nice to see you too.
Yes, great to have you here.
I'm looking forward.
Definitely.
Yeah,
Two LPC applicants today, yourself and another presentation.
okay,
First half of our meeting.
yeah. All right, that's good.
So as folks trickle in, I'm waiting for my chair, the committee chair, to arrive.
Okay,
So,
okay, that sounds good. Well, I'm here and I'm ready whenever you guys are ready.
okay, got it. Okay,
Beautiful.
thanks. I'll be right back.
Okay, no problem.
Good evening, Mr. Katz. How are you? Oh, he's connecting to order. Hold on. Good evening, Mr. Katz. Hey, Alejandra.
Hey, how's it going?
Pretty good. Okay, I've changed your designation to co-host.
Thank you.
Got it.
I'm trying to find the agenda.
Okay. So far, we have our LPC applicants, and they have arrived, Mr. Katz and Ms. Stanless. Mr. Katz is trying to connect his audio. I believe he just got it. Hey, Mr. Katz, how are you?
Where is the house? Okay, there's the agenda.
Oh, Mr. Katz, hold on. Let me unmute you. We can hear you.
I was joking. I said I had to ask my kids for some pointers on Zoom.
Oh, hey, we all do at this point. Glad to meet you all. Glad to put a face, as I still said to our other applicant, to an email.
Absolutely.
Definitely.
Mr. Katz, are you, which address are you, or are you Fenimore?
115 Fenimore Street.
Okay. Okay, great. So I can go ahead and, I'm just setting everything up to go quickly.
Sure.
Because we have a hard cutoff at 7 for Know Your Rights workshop, so I'm trying to just go quickly. And
Yeah, I'm just gonna put a copy of their applications into the chat because it's been distributed to the housing committee beforehand, so they should have reviewed it. So the applicants can just give a basic overview.
Okay, great.
So I had a question. So at 7 o'clock, do we then, we sign off? Is that it? Or we?
oh no, you're more than happy to stay on. It's for everyone is part of the housing committee is doing it. So everybody's welcome to stay on. It's fully public. And then if we have any really pressing business that we don't get done before 7, we can reconvene at 8 or
Definitely.
8:15ish, wrap up any committee business and then adjourn.
I see.
So very quickly, Alejandra, for in terms of as people enter the waiting room, do we just want to let them come in one by one so we can assess? Or do you want to make any announcements about potential, any other Zoom bombing activity, just to give like a standard overview of everyone will be muted as we expel if someone comes into the room?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Because I think I have the ability to pause and stop recording participants.
Yeah.
I can mute all. Okay. So what I'll do is I'll mute all, and then if somebody continues going, I'll speak up and say, well, they either stop or we're gonna boot them from and ban them from the call.
Got it.
Hopefully we don't have that issue.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, Mia, I don't have the full roster of all the committee board or committee members for this year.
I can resend the email to you.
Yeah, if you could please do that. Thank you.
Sure. Be right back.
Oh. Okay, so Nella cannot make it. Um, Mia, are you still there? All right. So you're still muted.
Hey, Alejandro, yeah, I'm just going through the email to get you the roster.
Okay.
Yeah, got it, found it. About to forward it to you now.
Sorry, everyone, for the late start. We're just having a bit of a difficulty, but hopefully we'll just be able to have a smooth meeting. Okay, so Mia, we only have 3 total members on the committee.
There are also community members listed as well.
Okay. But community board members, there's only 3.
Yeah.
Okay. And Ms. Blackwell's not here, so we don't have a quorum. So we can't do any vote any official business, but we can at least review.
Yeah, but you can also elect as chair to move it forward to the general board, have them appear at the general board, because they'll still have to appear to receive the full vote of the board.
Okay,
Yeah, they can still be moved forward to the final agenda for the general board meeting.
okay. So here's what I'll do. I'll do the first presentation with Mr. Katz. Okay. So I think, Mr. Katz, if you have a few minutes to explain the changes that you're going to be making at your
Sure.
property.
Absolutely. So I really haven't made any changes. Essentially, we took a burnt out house that, was sat vacant for the last, I want to say at least 10 years prior to us purchasing it in 2017, and restored it to landmark specifications. And, took 3 years, a lot longer and a lot more money than anybody could have anticipated. But I'm happy, we're happy with the end result. And the reason why I guess I'm here tonight and I received a violation from Landmarks is because there was a misunderstanding of me replacing the chain link fence where it existed previously without a permit. So they gave me a violation for that. But as you can see throughout the presentation, whether it be from current day pictures, what the house looked like in 2017, what it looked like on, you can see, there's clearly a fence and gates there as well. And if you look at like page, I want to say, what is it, page 5, when there is, the house, when it was with the LPC designation photo, there was clearly a fence in front. And if you look at the house as it is today, I restored it to the way it looked back in, the 1940s, but, obviously replaced the fence that was there. So I wasn't trying to hide anything from anybody. It was just literally a misunderstanding between myself and Tim Shaw, with emails that were going back and forth and trying to get approvals for, whether it be the color of the siding or anything else. I just, I thought I was allowed to do a direct replacement, but he said, yes, you were, but you needed a permit in order to do so. Essentially,
Okay.
That's why I'm here tonight.
Okay. Is there anybody who would like to speak to the issue or has any comments or concerns about pushing this forward to the general board? Sorry, Leslie, I think you're muted. I can. Sorry, I think you're still on mute, Leslie.
Leslie, I think I'm trying to unmute you and you're remuting, you may be remuting yourself.
You're still on mute.
All right.
There we go.
Can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Phil, I just want to say that I am your neighbor on Rutland 2. And I remember what the house used to look like, and I think you've done a marvelous job.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Any other particular comments on the property or the changes being made, or any objection to moving it forward to the full board? Okay, without objection, we'll move, I'll go ahead and move this forward to the full board for a vote. I don't see any issue. It seems in line with the historical nature of the property, and I think it's a fantastic renovation that's been done, and real addition to the neighborhood. So thank you for your
very
time,
much.
Mr. Katz, and for bringing this before the board.
Absolutely. Appreciate everyone's time.
Yep.
Have a good evening.
You too. Okay. And then is there anybody for the 1860 Bedford?
Yes, Anne Marie Stanislaus.
Okay. You have the floor if you want to explain the changes you're seeking to have.
So basically, we were working with the board back and forth, and really our only issue is twofold. One, the fencing, and the other is with regard to a walkway.
Okay.
Right. Yes. So right. So as you see with all as you can see the fence, and what I did was we pulled out additional homes in the area with the same kind of fencing. So you can see that we worked with the board in trying to make sure that we kept that historical view in terms of the fencing. And then with regard to the walkway, there is, if you go through the other slides, you'll be able to see that the walkway, the way it's set up, the vegetation, by the time everything, right. But these are pictures of the actual fencing and how it would look. And the walkway, most of it is preserved, except there was only one little area, and we have enough vegetation there so that you won't even see that walkway once everything starts growing in. Those were the only two minor things.
Okay. Are there, sorry, I'm just making sure to go through.
Right. So we took the time to give you, more than enough information about the fencing and, what the walkway was like. And then we took pictures of other homes in the area with the exact same fencing. Those are the things that we brought up, just so you can see. It's not like, this is on Maple Street, as you can see. So we took the time, we did some homework, and these are different walkways that we took just to show what the walkways would look like, and everything was within the area. And like I said, our concern was mostly to make sure that we preserved, the whole look of the area and the building, and not change the integrity too much. And I'm sure everybody's aware of Maple Street, that amazing house, and they have, walkway and fencing and everything. And the walkway, we didn't actually put in the walkway. That walkway was actually there already.
Okay. Yeah. I don't see any particular issue. It seems to fit with the rest of the neighborhood. Is there anybody who has any particular comments or objections or any concern?
I'm not even sure I see what the issue is, which might be a sign that it's more than okay.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So without any further comment or objection or concerns, we'll go ahead and move this to the full board for a vote. And so it'll be before a full vote of the community board at the next meeting. So I think that's it for the particular landmark issues. Go ahead. Okay.
Okay, got everybody. I just want to thank you so much for your time and giving us the ability to make the presentation.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
for coming and explaining the changes and preparing the presentation.
Excellent. Thanks so much.
No problem.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Okay. Since we are missing quite a few of the members of the committee, and also community members, usually what I'd like to do in the housing committee meetings is spend about the first 10 to 15 minutes, usually kind of just discussing particular issues in housing, to see what is going on, if there's any particular uptick in landlord issues or deed theft, or if anybody's hearing any issues happening in the community, to really just kind of talk about them. I think since the last time we've met, it's been now, I think, 3 months since our June meeting, and a lot's changed, and that's why I'm doing the Know Your Rights training at 7 o'clock for tenants, so that they have a particular ability to know their rights in regards to the eviction moratorium and in regards to landlords. So, if there's anything anybody wants to bring up or talk about or discuss that's been going on, this is the time, and the floor is yours.
I noticed there's been a lien sale that has been pushed back a few times. And I think the most recent day was sometime in early September, maybe the 3rd. What is the current status of it? Is it still scheduled to happen this year or no? Do you know?
I'm unsure. I know they've been continuously pushing back the lien sales and foreclosures because of liens, but and maybe something when we have the housing attorneys, they may be more knowledgeable on the Know Your Rights training. But I know that's been a component that a lot of advocates have been pushing for, in particular with the cancel rent and the moratorium, because oftentimes these lien sales are because of a few hundred or even $1,000 worth of like bills, usually like a water bill or something. And so, for somebody to lose a home potentially worth hundreds of thousands or millions due to like unpaid water bills is insane. So, I don't know if there's a moratorium. I can try and look real quick, but so apparently they were delayed until September 25th. And Governor Cuomo's executive orders was until October 3rd. I don't know if it was extended along with the rest of the executive order to the new year.
Okay. And speaking of moratoriums, how about does the CDC moratorium have any teeth to it? And has the governor said anything about it, whether we're even acknowledging it?
We're in uncharted waters with the
Yeah.
CDC. I mean, that one is, I don't even like, there's a lot of questions of whether or not the CDC even has the authority to do that. And they've issued that moratorium. And I think it's supposed to be for federally funded or backed mortgages. So it's like, there's a huge layer of complexity. I'm an attorney by day, and half the time, like, keeping even track of this is frustrating and complicated. So I can't even imagine for tenants. I think right now, the most important thing is the eviction moratorium, which is not really a full eviction moratorium. And I think we're going to go through this in the tenants' rights training, and they're going to explain more detail about what it means. But there's we're gonna go in more detail and explain what that actually means and how it affects people fully.
Okay.
Hey, Hannah.
Hello, how are you?
Good. So we just finished up our committee business that we had to get done. So we're just gonna I guess, I just kind of had the floor open for anybody who had particular questions or issues they want to discuss, but we should be on schedule to start the training hopefully just after 7.
Perfect, thanks.
Alejandra, you asked about, what we're hearing, what people need right now. What are our tools for finding that out, aside from just being a neighbor? So some background, this is my first one of these. I've been to some board meetings, some general meetings in the past, but this is my first time on a committee. And I just got an email inviting me to this, and that was my welcoming to the committee. And I'm not really sure in general what my role and responsibility is, as well as my duties to my neighbors. Should I be knocking on doors, telling them I'm here if they have questions and so forth?
Yeah, I mean, so I've only been on the housing committee for a year, and I've been chair for a year. And I really rely on a lot of the longtime members to be able to inform a lot of it. I think particularly now that we're not as in contact with our neighbors due to the pandemic, it becomes a little harder. But really, I think, yeah, reach out to neighbors and just let them know you're on a housing committee, and if they have particular questions, they can channel it to the community board, and we're really here to be a resource. And so we also want to add in referrals to other places. And so I think just kind of being like I want to say ambassador, but just a visible member, that if somebody has an issue, they can come to you, and then you can either refer them to me or Mia or the community board office.
Okay. Should I feel free to use the email thread, the same addresses that were on this invitation, to forward general questions to?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Hey, Migdalia, how have you been? You're still muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
I'm just so glad that everybody's safe and here tonight. We are missing the debate.
Oh, the debate doesn't start till 9, so if everything's on
Oh, was
schedule.
it? Somebody said 7 o'clock. Okay, good. So I have time.
Hi, Migdalia. It's Mia.
Hi, Mia. How you doing?
I'm good, and yourself?
I am blessed. Not complaining. I am blessed. Thank you. Thank you for
Yeah.
asking. Yes. Okay, great. Good to see and good to be in the meeting. It's been a while.
Yes.
This is so awesome. Even working from home, you can work from your bedroom. I only dress up when I have a staff meeting. And I usually throw an Afghan over my pajamas, so they don't even know I have pajamas on.
I usually just put my if I have a important presentation, I'm usually just in a t-shirt, but most days I'm just if I have an important presentation, I'll put on a dress shirt and blazer, and then I'm just in shorts.
It's awesome. I'm not glad about the COVID because I'm scared.
Yeah.
I don't even come out of my house unless I have to. But working from home is a blessing, I think. Especially, depending where you work at, but for me, it's a blessing. I'm in Harlem, and that's a long way to go.
Yes. So, I work in Midtown, so it saves about 2 hours a day in commuting. So it's
okay. There
nice.
you go. There you go. There you go. Yes.
I've been working from home most of my career.
Oh,
I
okay.
promise you will get tired of it. You will
Ah,
forget to even you'll forget how to even interact with people
Uh-oh.
face to
For real?
face. Not that I've done that or anything, but.
Okay. Wow. Okay. Not, oh gosh, I don't want to end up talking to my cats or throughout my whole life. I think I'm driving them crazy anyway. Wow. Okay. I don't know if I can do that. I probably can. That's good. Everything happens for a reason.
Oh, just an update on the landmarks board.
Oh,
I just
yeah.
got an email from Suki. They haven't gotten a chance to formally weigh in on it, but apparently from the sense from the board members is that the general recommendation is that they're going to approve it. Yeah, just a quick update. McDonald, we reviewed 2 applications for the landmark preservation permits for 2 fences around 2 properties.
What, oh, Two Park Place?
No, there were, one was on Fenimore Street and the other was on Maple Street in the Lefferts Gardens Historical District.
Okay. All right. Okay. History, yeah. Lefferts City. Lefferts. Lafayette. Okay. That's not in the park, is it? Not in the park.
No, it was for 2 homes. They're putting
Okay.
fences in the front.
Okay, okay. That's the only thing about landmarking your house or whatever, your area, your block. You get asked permission for everything.
Yeah.
Oh,
One of them had a pretty extensive renovation, like real extensive.
Wow.
And it seems funny that the one thing they got hung up on was the fence.
I
I mean,
that's the simplest. It should be the simplest.
yeah.
Hmm.
I think we're waiting for Sia from Housing Justice for All and Esteban from Crown Heights Tenants Union.
Did I miss the housing committee meeting at 6?
We started at 6:30 because we're doing housing committee, but this is still the housing committee.
Right. Okay. I didn't miss much, did I? Because I just read the email.
Yeah, so we started at 6:30 to do some of the landmark issues and get those out of the
Okay.
way so that we could do the presentation right at 7.
Okay, cool.
We'll just give it like at least 3 or 4 more minutes so everybody can join in, and then we'll get started.
Sure.
And we'll just give it just another minute or 2 and then we'll get started.
Okay.
Oh, Hannah, I can go ahead and share the screen. I had it prepared just in case, so
Perfect, thanks.
you just have to say next slide when you're ready to go.
Fair enough.
Okay, since we are recording, we can always just distribute this later to the rest of the community board, and just make sure we edit this portion so that it's a quick version. So we can go ahead and get started. So I'm sure everyone wants to watch the debate tonight. So first off, I want to thank everyone for joining. These are really challenging times with COVID and the pandemic. And I think there's a lot of worry in the community with tenants, and a lot of confusion particularly with the eviction moratorium. And I wanted to make sure that there was solid information on what's going on to the best that we know, and so that everyone can get connected to solid resources if they're finding themselves in any trouble with their rent or with their home, and so that nobody ends up losing their home. So with that being said, I want to welcome Joanna Lane. Joanna Lane is a staff attorney at the Brooklyn office of the Legal Aid Society, where she helps tenants avoid evictions, get repairs, and fight tenant harassment. Before joining the Legal Aid Society, she was a group representation lawyer at Brooklyn Legal Services Corporation A, where she worked with tenant organizers to help tenant associations fight abusive landlords. Next
Hi,
up
everybody.
Next up is Hannah Fishman. Hannah is a senior staff attorney with the New York Legal Assistance Group's Tenants' Rights Unit. Hannah represents tenants facing eviction, unsafe housing conditions, and harassment in housing court and other legal proceedings. We also have Esteban Giron, who is an organizer and tenant advocate with the Crown Heights Tenants Union. He serves on the board of directors of the Tenants Political Action Committee and has been a resident member of the CB9 ULURP Land Use Committee for 5 years. He has lived in CB9 for 8 years with his husband, Sean, and their dog please, I hope I don't butcher this. Chikochu.
Chikochu. She's right here.
Oh my gosh.
Hi, all. How you doing?
Okay. And I think we were expecting to have Sia from Housing Justice for All, but I don't
She
think
should be hopping on at some point, I think.
Okay.
She might not be on yet. But yeah.
Okay, so I'll introduce her when she jumps on. But with that being said, I think Hannah, you're starting off, correct? Okay.
Yep. Hi, everybody. It's nice to see you all. Oh, there's the slideshow. We just moved to the next slide, which I guess is the second slide. A quick overview of what we're going to talk about tonight. We're going to, like Alejandra said, give a brief overview of what's going on currently in the courts, given the pandemic, the supposed eviction moratoria that we'll talk a little bit about, which has been misrepresented pretty heavily in the media. So we want to make sure that everybody has a real understanding about what's going on there. And then we're going to talk a little bit about folks' rights as tenants and go into issues with non-payment of rent, other types of cases, repairs, harassment, and talk a little bit about what is going on in the tenant organizing and legislation world, including talking a little bit about rent strikes and legislation that's currently in the works to try and address some of the issues that we have citywide and statewide with tenant rights. And then we're going to leave a pretty substantial chunk of time to answer questions. So I hope everybody will have questions, and we're here to answer any that you do have. So with that, we're going to jump straight in. So I think Joanna, we can jump to the next slide, and Joanna's going to start out by talking about our eviction moratorium.
Yeah, so the big question is there an eviction moratorium? Because you may have heard that on the news about a week ago, Cuomo told reporters that he was issuing an executive order with an eviction moratorium until January 1st, 2021. We were all momentarily thrilled, and then we found out that was a total lie. So there is no eviction moratorium, and tenants should definitely be aware to be on the lookout for cases, any court papers that they might receive, that they may need to respond to them, and they should definitely seek guidance from a lawyer or a tenant organizer to figure out what exactly to do. It may not be that they are immediately going to have to go to court, but there is no moratorium on evictions, and tenants should be on the lookout for any court papers. That being said, there is a moratorium in a sense on some types of evictions until the end of the year. And so there are certain specific tenants who are protected in different ways through both Governor Cuomo's executive order, as well as a moratorium that actually Donald Trump kind of established through the CDC, which is kind of crazy. But so there's two things that go simultaneously until the end of this year. The first thing is the CDC moratorium. That's the Centers for Disease Control issued a moratorium of sorts that says that if you send your landlord a declaration explaining that you are unable to pay rent, you've sought every form of government assistance available to you, and that you understand generally that you have to pay rent, but you just can't pay rent right now. Then once you've sent that declaration to your landlord is not supposed to take any steps to evict you, which means not only can the marshal not come to your door, but also like they can't even really serve you with court papers after you've sent that declaration. And so that can be very powerful. And it's something that tenants may want to consider using, but probably with advice from an attorney or a tenant organizer beforehand, because it is a little technical. And also these declarations are under penalty of perjury, so you can't lie in them, which is very scary and definitely a reason to think a little bit hard before doing one of these declarations. But one other piece of uncertainty is that it's not really clear whether this would apply to any type of housing court case or just a non-payment case. You would think it would be just a non-payment case, because the idea is that if you can't pay rent due to the pandemic, right? Like specifically, the idea of the declaration is that you're supposed to explain that you lost income. I failed to say that before, that you lost income due to the pandemic, and that's the reason you fell behind in rent. it may apply to other types of cases as well, and it seems pretty broad. So that's one type of protection that's out there, and we'll get into a little bit more of the nuts and bolts of this later on in the presentation. The other thing that's out there is this Cuomo executive order, which he, again, incorrectly claimed was an eviction moratorium. It is not, but Cuomo did release an executive order about a week ago that says that a law called the Tenant Safe Harbor Act is expanded to include a broader group of tenants. And that's a little bit of a convoluted way of saying it, but what it actually does in practice is it allows any tenant who suffered financial hardship during the pandemic to potentially be protected from eviction, you know, by laying out the defense that they are unable to pay, you know, due to COVID-19, whether it's because they lost their job or perhaps because they suffered other financial expenses due to the pandemic. And again, there's a little bit of uncertainty whether this applies just to cases where tenants are being evicted for non-payment of rent, or whether it might apply to other types of cases as well, including cases where the landlord just wants the tenant out, and so the tenant's lease is up, and they're not subject to any other rent stabilization or other protections. So for that reason, really the bottom line of this is that it doesn't make a lot of sense. It's certainly not an eviction moratorium, but there are a lot of defenses that tenants have, which would have to be sort of argued in court potentially. And so any tenant who is facing the possibility of eviction should definitely talk to a lawyer or a tenant organizer and get some guidance specific to their situation, because it's kind of, you know, too convoluted to explain in any, you know, broad strokes who can be evicted and who can't be evicted. But there are enormous protections and, like, you know, lots of ways that you can kind of weasel things in there to protect people who maybe even aren't supposed to to be covered by these provisions to help people. So that's the basic, that's the overview. But that being said, there's also certain people who are not necessarily included by these orders. So you just need to, kind of get specific advice on an individual situation. Another major thing is that in the past, tenants who had already had a judgment against them in housing court could be evicted with no prior notice whatsoever. They would just receive a marshal's notice at their door. So that would be a form of notice. But other than that, they would not have any further court proceedings. They would just be evicted. Now there's a requirement that because it's been so long since housing court has been closed, if a person was about to be evicted on March 12th, let's say, before the pandemic, the landlord has to go back to court in order to enforce that eviction. So they can't just serve the tenant with a marshal's notice and then evict them. They have to actually go before a judge. They have to file a motion, send that motion to the tenant in the mail, and the tenant has a right to fight their case in court, and also has the right to be connected with a lawyer to help them with that. So that's something very important, is that there should not be any surprise evictions. Of course, there's always issues with people receiving papers and knowing about their cases, but there is a guarantee that landlords have to go to court to request permission to evict a tenant, even if there was already an eviction in the works back in March. So next slide. These are just a couple of notices to look out for. So these are things to look out for if a person already had a housing case going on prior to the pandemic. So if tenants had a court date, let's say in February before the pandemic, they may get a notice to come back to court, and it could look like this notice on the left, this motion to bring a case back. It'll be like a little bit of a thick packet of papers, but it'll have this usually on the front page, which is a notice that explains that tenants can call a certain phone number, which we'll repeat later on, to get a free lawyer to help with their case. And so if tenants receive that notice, they should definitely call this number to get a lawyer. You can also call 311 and say you have like a housing issue or you want housing legal advice, and you can get a lawyer that way. And every tenant has been assigned to a lawyer thus far, because the court is really determined to try to keep people physically out of court. And that's the best way of doing it. So another notice to look out for, which is even more dire, is the one on the right. That's the marshal's notice of eviction. And that is the notice that is like the immediate thing that people will receive right before they're about to be evicted. So if a tenant ever receives that, they should again, call 311 and ask to speak to a lawyer, a housing lawyer, or call this number, which we'll share later on, to get some guidance for how to respond to their case, because this is absolutely something, if they don't respond to it, tenants have some time to ask the court to stop their eviction, but they do need to act pretty fast. Next slide. Next, we'll talk a little bit about what the court is doing right now. So immediately after the pandemic, for a long time, the court was closed to everything except for emergency cases. And those emergency cases included cases for very serious repair problems, cases where a tenant had been locked out of their apartment, and cases where the tenant had already been evicted and they were trying to get back in. So that was the case for the first few months of the pandemic, that the courts were only hearing these emergency cases. And then since that time, unfortunately, despite the urging of tenants and others, the court has gradually creeped in more types of cases, including cases where people can potentially be evicted. So right now, the court has just started hearing motions that landlords have to bring if they want to evict a tenant who already had a judgment of eviction against them before the pandemic. So again, that person who maybe was supposed to be evicted back in March, and then the pandemic happened before they were actually evicted, the landlord can make a motion to evict that tenant, and that motion will be held in court. Now, it doesn't have to be held in person. The tenant can call the number at the bottom, the 718 number, or call 311 and get a lawyer to represent them. And once they do that, the lawyer will be able to appear for them over Zoom, well, over technically Microsoft Teams, but just like we're doing right now over video conference. And the tenant themselves will probably never have to physically go to court during the pandemic. There's also a way that if the tenant wants to represent themselves, if they don't want the free lawyer, they can also appear via phone if they prefer to. And so there's ways for people to do it without physically exposing themselves to the virus by going to court, but it's still a pretty dire thing. It's pretty depressing to have an eviction case over Zoom, basically. So that is happening. And again, like any tenant who had a case going on before the pandemic may be at risk of receiving one of these motions, which they would definitely want to get some legal advice on and ultimately respond to, because they may have a court date that is, that although it's virtual and they don't have to appear in person, they do have to respond in some way. And if they don't, it's possible that tenants could actually be defaulted and evicted, which is very sad, and that's a very new development. Lastly, the one thing that's happening is that in cases that were already going on before the pandemic, where both sides have lawyers, there have been these conferences, like mostly to discuss settlement, sometimes to argue motions or whatever. And there's also been a few trials where both sides have lawyers. So far, tenants without lawyers are, not doing very much except for the possibility of getting served with those motions. But cases with lawyers are, moving forward a little bit. Currently, any case that the landlord brought after March 16th, 2020 is not being scheduled yet. And, most of those cases weren't able to be started early on in the pandemic, but landlords could start bringing cases in around September. And those cases have just been hanging out there, not being calendared or anything. We're just kind of waiting to see what happens with those, but that could change at any time. And so the bottom line again is, like, tenants with cases should definitely reach out just to get a touch base with a lawyer, even if they don't have to respond right away. And that number is at the bottom of the screen here. So I think I'll pass it back to Hannah to move forward.
Thanks, Joanna. So next up, we're going to talk a little bit about just generally your rights as a tenant. And I'm going to go into what to expect in situations where people are struggling to pay rent right now. But first, quickly, I'm going to do, Alejandra, next slide, please. A quick overview of the different types of apartments there are in the city. This isn't really a comprehensive list, but it is the most common types of apartments that exist in the city. The first and most common most common of regulated housing is rent stabilized or rent controlled housing. Rent controlled is quickly fading away. It's sort of the unicorn of housing in New York City. There's, I think now it's certainly less than 5% of housing in New York City. It's almost none. And that's because you have to have had a direct connection to the apartment since the early 70s. And so as time has gone on, most of those rent controlled apartments have become rent stabilized. So many of you probably live in rent stabilized housing. Apartments that are rent stabilized are more than just prevented from increases in rent. There are a lot of rights that are afforded to people who live in rent stabilized housing, such as a right to a renewal lease. So that's just something to be aware of if you live in a rent stabilized building, and you may live in a rent stabilized apartment without knowing it. Generally, this is a very general statement, but if you're living in an apartment building that was built before 1974, so an old building with 6 or more units, it's often rent stabilized. And there are exceptions to that rule. There are exceptions to most of these rules, but it just gives you a sense of what to think about if you do enter into housing court. There's also NYCHA housing, which is the city's public housing agency, and project-based Section 8 and Section 8 vouchers. Section 8 vouchers are sort of a roaming program. We say they live with the tenant. And so if you have a Section 8 voucher, you have the ability to move. Whereas if you have a project-based Section 8 Section 8 apartment, it functions like public housing. You have that apartment and you live there. The voucher lives with the unit rather than the individual. And then there's market rate or unregulated housing. There's a lot of that in the city too. That is what is considered unregulated, but it doesn't mean you have no rights whatsoever. That's very important. For instance, if your landlord still can't harass you, he still has to take you to court to evict you. You still have a right to habitable housing, to a place that is not absolutely awful and falling apart around you. So those are just some basics to keep in mind as we talk about this. Next slide, please. So what happens if you can't pay your rent? Now, this is always a problem in New York where our rents are absurdly high, but it's, I think, particularly hard for folks right now. So some basics to understand is that your landlord cannot just say, oh, you owe me money, you're out. Nor will the fact that you just owe rent affect your credit, nothing like that. They must take you to court in order to get the money. They must take you to court in order to get the apartment back. So folks are receiving what are called rent demands, where they get a request for money from the landlord. That's not, and it says, if you don't pay, we will evict you. That doesn't mean that after 14 days, you are going to be kicked out. It means after 14 days, they can start a case against you. And that's a very important distinction. Also want to make sure that you're aware that there are resources available to help people pay back rent in their apartments. So, but all of this you can get more information about by speaking with a lawyer or a tenant organizer. We're going to share our contact information, things like that, and give you information on where to get specific information on that. One of the most common programs is the One-Shot Deal program through HRA. That can help you pay back rental arrears. That's the money due from before, but you should not expect to have to pay the full amount by yourself, because you may very well be able to get assistance. Will you go to the next slide, please? So here we just put together some sample papers so that folks can be aware of what they're looking out for. So on the left, we have this 14-day rent demand. That's the first step that the landlords have to go through in order to start a housing case against you. And so you'll get, it might not look exactly like this. There's a lot more variety in what the rent demands look like, but it'll say this is a demand for payment of rent and has to give you at least 14 days to make those payments. And then after the 14 days, they will serve you with with court papers. That's what the document on the right is. This is what those court papers will look like, at least vaguely. And so once you get that, that's when it's time for you to reach out to the court. It still doesn't mean you have to leave. They still have to get a judgment against you. They still have to get both a possessory and a money judgment against you. They can't just say, oh, you're out. And so this is, again, the beginning of the process, not the end, but it is something that you need to be aware of. As soon as you get either one of these documents, you should reach out to a lawyer, a tenant organizer, and get some advice on how to handle your case. Next slide, please. So I also want to make you guys aware that they can't just sort of throw these at you. There are certain requirements that they have to go through in order to serve you properly. I'm flagging this for you now because it's the kind of thing that's easy to forget about. You know that you got the papers, but you don't remember how, and this sort of defense needs to be raised quickly. If your landlord doesn't properly give you the papers, this is both the rent demand and the petition, then your case can be dismissed, which will give you more time to pull together money if you need to pay back any sort of debt owed. Although the reasons to get a case dismissed or not are very specific to your situation and is something you should talk about with a lawyer or somebody with expertise in the area. So I think the first choice for delivery of papers is in person. The ideal is they knock on your door, you open the door, and they hand it to you. Or they hand it to somebody else that lives in your household. That person should be someone of, they call it suitable age and discretion, which just means somebody over 18, pretty much, who lives there or works there if you have a home health aide, something like that. If they can't reach you or somebody else, then they have to do what's called mail and mail service. Now, before they resort to this, nail and mail is sort of like a legal term that comes from, I'll call it olden times, where they literally used to nail it to your door, these notices. Now it's often slipped under the door or sort of tucked in the space between the doorknob and the door. But they have to drop it off, mail it to you, both via regular mail and certified mail. And they can't just do that as a first resort. They have to make at least 2 attempts to try and contact you first at different types of, on different days at different times of the day. So this sounds like a lot of information, and it is. And the reason I'm getting at it is mostly to impress upon everybody the importance of keep the envelopes, keep everything the papers came in, keep every copy that it came in that you received, and make sure you just write down what happened. If you come home and you see sitting on the table that there's some court papers, ask your family, how did this land here? Who accepted this? Where did this come from? And just write it down so you have those records. We'll talk about this a little bit more when we talk about repairs and other things, but it's generally just a good idea with your housing to sort of keep a running notebook for yourself, so that you can keep track of everything that's going on. So if somebody knocks on the door and you don't get to the door, and you think you might be receiving a non-payment proceeding, you might want to just write down, oh, somebody knocked on the door, I missed it. And then if somebody actually hands you the papers, same thing. And just write down the date, time, and what happened. This applies to repairs as well. So if you start seeing a leak in your bathroom, write down the first day you saw it, take pictures, that kind of thing. Again, we're going to talk a little bit more about repairs later. I just wanted to throw that in there while I was advising you all to start keeping a notebook. It has greater purpose than just this one detail. All right, next slide, please. Okay, so Joanna mentioned this a few minutes ago, but it sounds like, or the way that the courts are viewing things, the government is viewing things, is that there's a difference between people who can't pay rent because of the pandemic and people who just can't pay rent generally. So the Tenant Safe Harbor Act exists as a protection for people who have struggled to pay rent because of the pandemic. So if you fell behind on rent because of the pandemic, you cannot be evicted for that rent money. So that means that, say you lost your job because of the pandemic in March, and then you haven't been able to pay your rent since then, you can't be evicted for that money. They can still get that money. They can still get a money judgment against you for that money, but you can't be evicted for it. That said, you have to prove that you lost money because of the pandemic, not just generally that you lost money. There are different ways you can do that. It still sort of remains to be seen exactly what the court's going to accept for that, just because it's such a new thing and most of the newer cases aren't being heard yet, as Joanna mentioned. But if you owe rent from before March, from before the pandemic hit, you can still be evicted for that money. So one sort of trick to keep in mind just generally when you're paying your rent, if you pay by check or money order, always write what the money you are paying is for on the money order and keep the receipt, or on the check and keep the receipt. So if you make a payment tomorrow and you owe rent back to January, write on the payment that it's for January 2020 rent. That way, what you're doing is you're sort of tagging your rent money for the time period when you can be evicted, so that even if you do end up owing money, you can still be protected from eviction, which is a big difference, obviously, owing money versus losing your home. That's something to keep in mind. We also mentioned earlier that there is the possibility of rental assistance for folks. So I mentioned the one-shot deal. That's a really great resource. Usually, depending on your circumstances, it'll either be a no-interest loan or a grant, a gift. For most people, it is a loan, but for people with SSD, it is considered to be a grant that you do not have to pay back. That's not the only rental arrears program that exists. One huge problem with the one-shot deal is it's not available for people who are undocumented. However, there are other charities and agencies that exist that can help for people who are in different circumstances that don't qualify for the one-shot deal, or if so much money is owed that it can't all be covered by the one-shot deal. And that's something that when you speak to an attorney or an organizer, they can help you figure out what programs might be available to assist. That's also, I also just want to note that one major requirement for a one-shot deal is that you're able to prove that you have ongoing ability to pay the rent. So what's relevant there is the timing of your application. When you start your application, you want to make sure that you can show that you can pay the rent on an ongoing basis. It doesn't have to be you as an individual, it's your household together. But that's one requirement that you'll need to be aware of, and one of the reasons why it can work in your favor to do things like get a case dismissed, something like that, so that you can get yourself back onto a stronger financial footing, or as strong as you can be so that you can get that assistance. And if you do end up speaking to a lawyer or an organizer, which you're going to hear is a refrain throughout this presentation, is there are lawyers available. You are speaking to two of them tonight. There are organizers who are also here tonight, and we're happy to help, but you got to reach out to us to use us. So we're just going to keep telling you to do that, because even though we're trying to give you broad strokes here, the reality is it's a very day-by-day situation, what's been happening in housing court and in the eviction world. And so as things continue to change, we want to make sure that you're still getting the information you need. And everybody's situation is unique. Nobody's the same. No two cases are the same. So we want to make sure that you guys get what you need on an individualized basis. Next slide, please. Okay, so I guess this is what I was just saying. I'm just going to say it one more time. Get legal advice. It's here for you. We live in a city that has provided free legal advice for everybody right now. Hopefully very soon, everybody will be able to access a lawyer in the long run in housing court, though for now it is everybody seems to be getting lawyers that have cases in housing court and getting the impression that's just going to continue to expand quickly. At the latest, by 2022, all people under a certain income level are entitled to an attorney in housing court. And so that at the latest, that's 2022. We're hopeful that that will be available sooner than that. And right now, practically speaking, that is the case. Again, there's agencies and organizations out there that can help you pay back your rent. They can also help you apply for ongoing assistance with rent payments. People with families, people in certain circumstances can qualify for ongoing rental assistance programs. We haven't gone into any of these in great detail in this presentation here, but that's another thing for you to be aware of and think about. We also, I have here, we're gonna, Esteban's gonna talk about organizing with your neighbors around some of these issues in a little bit, more around the context of repairs, but that's something that you should all be thinking about, is how to band together with your neighbors, and always call 311 or this other phone number, which we're gonna share over and over again to try and get in touch with a lawyer. So now I'm bouncing back to Joanna.
Yeah, Esteban or Sia, do you want to talk about the rent strike movement, like in the context of people who can't pay their rent right now, or do you want to talk about that later?
Esteban has a plan. You give it to him.
I have a plan. I've introduced Sia Weaver here, my colleague from Housing Justice for All, and also the organizer of my building, which is fun, several years ago within the CHTU. Yeah, so just to touch on that, for folks that are that find themselves in, without the ability to pay their rent, you're not alone. There are a lot of people that are not able to pay their rent right now, and what we've done, in addition to trying to get these eviction moratoriums extended, is we basically given people that have not been able to pay their rent the option of banding together and actually creating a political moment, a political crisis for Albany to bring relief to both tenants and homeowners, small landlords who are about to get bought out by big corporations. We're basically giving the legislature a way out of this potential crisis, and it's about to be a pretty insane crisis. So one of the things that we've done is, if you know anybody or are in the position where you're not going to be able to pay rent, and they explain that there's some things that might be winnable in court, but what really I think will make a difference is the solidarity that we have within the neighborhood, within your block, within your building. So we'll talk a little bit more about how we organize that, but just so that you know that that's a separate option from all of this stuff. Like, the law is there, we've worked on it, we've tried to get better laws, we're working on getting even better laws, but the law is not always going to be on your side, and when it's not, there are other ways, and that's what tenant organizers are here for. So I'll leave it at that, and we can come back to it.
Yeah, so I'm going to talk about like the 3 bills that we're fighting for, and then Esteban is going to talk a little bit about this Eviction Defense Network and like what we're doing locally to fight for them. And I guess to preface, like, my part is like the less important part. We're not going to win. So I think just like a general framing right now is this has been like a really helpful presentation on your rights as a tenant. But the important thing to know is that the eviction pipeline is starting itself back up. It's been shut down for a few months now. And it's like, you know, it's being turned back on. So even if people aren't being evicted right now, eviction notices are going out, rent demands are going out. The pipeline is building itself, and we need to be ready to fight back on that. And the challenging thing here is that our elected officials and the media believe that evictions are not happening. And so they really think that they took care of this problem. They are sticking their heads in the sand, in my opinion. And we have a real urgent need to get our state elected officials back into legislative session. They haven't met since June, in the middle of like a horrible pandemic. And to pass actually, we need to force them to confront this crisis the way that tenants are confronting the crisis, because they are not. So Esteban will talk a little bit more about like what we can do locally, but I just want to say there's no replacement for local organizing when it comes to really making our decision makers feel accountable to what's happening in the world around them. So anyway, I'm going to share my screen if somebody can make me co-host. Or if I'm allowed to.
I think it was disable. Oh, it looks like
Hey,
it's
Sia,
Okay.
you have co-host capabilities. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. All right. Okay. View. I'm gonna just run through this. I'm not gonna show you everything. So basically, just according to just some background here on the context, 58% of New Yorkers have like moderate to no confidence that they can pay next month's rent. And that same statistic, if you break it out by race, is pretty dramatic. 51% of Black households have missed 1 month's rent since the beginning of the pandemic as of July, compared with just 6% of white households. So when the eviction mill starts itself back up, we know who is going to be evicted. 1.4 million tenants are behind on rent. And we're just going to talk a little bit about what our solutions here are. So I'm going to talk about two bills in particular. We have a third, but I want to spend my time on two of them. So the first is the Rent and Mortgage Cancellation Act of 2020. We call this our cancel rent bill. It's a really strong bill. There's a national movement to cancel rent. But I know people always say, what about the landlords? And this bill is really amazing because it provides aid to tenants, but it also bails out small landlords and actually all landlords, and is a really robust program that clears back rent for residential tenants, and it clears rent for those who can't pay it for the duration of the crisis. But it also suspends mortgage payments to give all community members really a clean slate to make sure that nobody loses their housing during this period. It creates a $2 billion small landlord hardship fund that would allow, well, it's a $2 billion landlord fund. That's just a number that we're playing with. That it's not, the 2 billion number is not in the bill. That's how much we think it might cost. That landlords could apply to and get direct relief. And the bill directs HCR to create a process that prioritizes landlords with fewer assets. So that means that Blackstone, who would be bailed out by a voucher program, would have to go to the back of the line on this, this rent relief program. And the reason why it's so important to us is that we have landlords be the ones who apply for aid instead of tenants, is because there are so many undocumented New Yorkers and New Yorkers who work in the cash economy, or New Yorkers who are unable to meet the burdens that are posed by a tenant voucher program. As an example, in the sort of woefully insufficient program passed in June of $100 million to support tenants, only $11 million has gone out the door so far. So that means that the state is just sitting on $89 million that they just can't get out the door because it's been so onerous for tenants to apply. So that's a huge failure. So we think this approach, this sort of cancel rents and mortgages approach, where the burden is off of tenants to apply and onto landlords who have many other resources like bookkeepers, lawyers, sort of a set of expertise because they are property managers in New York City. They're the ones who have to apply for aid. But aid does come to them. So it's not really asking everybody to just cancel and not pay rent. Again, it provides relief and direct relief to landlords and small homeowners and works with other housing and commercial tenants legislation to stabilize communities and transition to a real just recovery. If landlords get aid from this program, they are subject to good cause eviction and a sort of rent freeze for 5 years. And this is the only bill before the state legislature that has aid for homeowners in it right now. I talked about that already. It doesn't cancel rent universally. It forgives back rent for those who have not paid during the crisis. And it prevents landlords from taking tenants to court for eviction, but it doesn't prevent tenants from paying rent or landlords from collecting rent. So, you know, people keep saying that this is just a bailout to like people who make $400,000 in rent on like with views of the Hudson River. In theory, yes, but there aren't that many of those people. And those people are probably paying rent. They've been paying rent this whole time, you know, and so it doesn't stop those people from paying rent, you know, it doesn't prevent landlords from collecting rent. It says that if you didn't pay it because you couldn't, we're giving you the benefit of the doubt and we're clearing folks back rent to give them a fresh start. We prefer this. Some of the reasons I've already talked about is because landlords have access to financial management and management services apply for aid. Corporate landlords receive less and undocumented people are able to receive benefits compared to vouchers that puts all of the burden on to renters themselves. It gets aid to people who need it the fastest. It's scalable. There's fewer landlords and tenants, so landlords are better equipped to apply, and it's cost effective. Okay, and then the other bill that I wanted to talk about was this foreclosure and eviction moratorium bill. It's way less complicated. This bill is sponsored by, oh, and I should say this bill, the rent and mortgage cancellation bill, is sponsored by Julia Salazar in the Senate and Yuli New in the Assembly. And then the other bill I wanted to talk about is this eviction moratorium bill. So this bill is sponsored by Senator Myrie in the Senate and Assemblymember Reyes in the Assembly. And it would put an eviction moratorium, a true moratorium that prevents filings as well as money judgments, so you wouldn't have to go to court, in place for the duration of the crisis until we exit phase 4, plus a full year. It prevents public and private foreclosures as well. So that means if you are a homeowner who can't pay your mortgage, your foreclosure cannot move forward. And it prevents commercial residents or commercial tenants as well as residential tenants from being evicted. So that's a very, very strong bill. This is a bill number right here, SO8667 and A10827. Strongly support that bill and urge you to call your state reps and ask them to support it as well. And those are the two bills that I wanted to talk about. I spent most of the time on cancel rent because it's more complicated and people tend to have a lot of questions about homeowners and how they will fare from it. But I really do think it's a comprehensive package that provides aid to all types of people in all types of housing situations. So I'll stop there and see if folks have questions before passing it to Esteban to talk about the organizing we're doing to make all of this possible.
Joanna and Hannah, would you guys want to go back to, I think we skipped a couple slides?
Yeah, we could go back if you want to pick up where we left off in the other PowerPoint. We could just, I'll run through these last few slides pretty quickly before taking questions, if that's okay.
Sounds good.
Cool. Oh, can you just go back a couple slides to the beginning of the holdovers section? Oh, yes. Okay. So yeah. So next slide. Nope. Oh, sorry. Previous slide, I guess. What if my landlord wants me to move that slide?
Don't let him move that slide.
Thank you. Sorry. So just wanted to flag very quickly, I will make this very, very short, that there are other types of cases besides non-payment cases, and that those cases can still go on, even during the pandemic, to some extent, with all the caveats that we described earlier. So in some buildings, and especially like, buildings that are not rent stabilized, not NYCHA or anything like that, just like market rate, unregulated buildings, the landlord may have the right to ask you to move out for just no good reason at all. Or even in rent stabilized or other buildings, the landlord could also decide that they want you to move because of some specific reason, like you're committing a nuisance, you're playing your music at 3 a.m. on top volume every day or whatever. And so in those cases, the landlord has to give you at least 30 days notice in writing and potentially longer, potentially up to 90 days notice. And even if the landlord acts like you have no rights, even if you're just an unregulated market rate tenant, you may actually have more protections than you realize. The truth is you may even be rent stabilized and you don't realize it. So again, bottom line, reach out to a lawyer or a tenant organizer to talk about your situation if you ever receive these court papers, and don't be intimidated. Don't just move out because the landlord says you have to. They do have to take you to court, and people have so many more defenses than they realize in these types of cases as well. So then I'll move forward to the next slide just very briefly. Like you can get a lawyer, same as before. You can also sometimes get assistance to move if you do end up having to move out of your apartment, which is often very rare. You should not feel like you're definitely going to have to move if you get one of these cases, but in the event that you do, you can get assistance with doing that. So next slide after that is about repair issues. Just want to highlight that you have a right to have repairs in your apartment. You have a right to a habitable apartment. And so if your landlord is not doing repairs, there's a number of things that you can do. I think Esteban will talk about some of the strategies in a minute, but from sort of a legal side of things, you can definitely, document that you need repairs by writing your landlord a letter. You can call 311 and inspect and ask somebody to do a housing. You can call 311 to request an inspection of the conditions in your apartment. And if they do inspect and they find these conditions, the city is supposed to fine your landlord. And then you can also start a case called an HP action, which can enforce your right to repairs. You can do that yourself using this app or website called Just Fix NYC. It's literally, instead of like .com or whatever, it's just .nyc, so justfix.nyc. And you can also get guidance from this from a lawyer by calling the number 311 or that phone number listed there. And then I think Esteban will discuss this further, but you can form a tenant association as well to, enforce your right to repairs. The same thing goes, next slide, please. The same thing goes if your landlord is harassing you. This is completely illegal. They're not allowed to try to trick you into moving out. They're not allowed to yell at you for complaining about repairs. They're not allowed to do anything sort of, there's like a pretty broad definition of harassment. They're not allowed to do anything to make you feel intimidated or make you feel tricked into giving up your rights to your apartment. And you can also start an HP action for harassment. It's also very effective to band together with your neighbors when you're dealing with this type of thing. So with that, I think that may be all that I have to say. If you want to move on to the next couple of slides, Esteban and Tia can take it back.
Yep, I'm off mute. So that's a lot of information. So I want to back us up a little bit and just talk about if we want to go to the How Do Tenants Fight Back slide, that would help. Yes. So basically, by the time that you've gotten court papers, you really should have already been talking to your neighbors. If it's already happened, it's not too late. We can help you do that. The CHC has been organizing in the neighborhood, in particular in CB8 and CB9 since 2013. And so we know the landlords around here. We know the electeds. We know the terrain. but ultimately it's really your neighbors that are going to be able to help you stay in your home. And that's, it seems like a lot, the logical thing, but like a lot of times you don't think about that. But you really have to get to know your neighbors. So like that's step one. Like if you don't, or if you're new to the neighborhood, go hang out outside of your bodega, talk to people coming in and out of your building, and just get a sense of who's there, how long they've been there, what kind of things have happened in the building. Most likely, you're going to find that they're dealing with the same things that you are, the same types of repair issues, the same, economic issues that we're all facing right now. And then you can start to talk about things like forming a tenant association. It's really not that complicated of a concept. You're going to, in a pandemic, it's a little bit different. Like we've seen people meeting over Zoom, which is a useful thing, but there's a lot of elderly tenants that are not quite as adept at technology. So if you're younger and you can reach out to them and sort of be inclusive in that regard, like it's going to help a lot. I feel like Zoom is actually good for vulnerable populations right now if we can figure out how to do the technology. So yeah, you like I was saying before, like we have this massive, like the largest rent strike in New York City history basically happening right now, in order to move the legislature to actually, first to actually meet. Like Sia said, it's been since June. We've been getting these like sort of fake extensions of a moratorium, and it's about to become a huge public health crisis. I mean, we're housing committee here, but like think about the effect of hundreds and thousands of people going to court because they go to court, they don't know that they can do something virtually. There's all sorts of due process issues that are happening right now with housing court. These people are going to be having to go to court, put themselves at risk, possibly end up homeless, and then like there's not enough hotels to house everybody that's about to be made homeless. It's not there. And so the way that I look at the strategy right now is, and the way I think we've been like sort of framing it is, we got to get Zellner's bill passed like immediately. If we don't get that passed, we're going to lose a ton of homes. And that would give us a year. And from that point, then we could take the time to, to do the political education and the organizing that it's going to take to win the cancellation of rent. I mean, the cancellation of rent is not an easy sell. Even though like we can look at it and see that it clearly helps homeowners, it helps tenants, and it does so in a way that, that actually helps. There was one rent relief bill that was passed this past summer, along with the Tenant Safe Harbor Act, which we call the Tenant Debt Collection Act, because it will leave you in fully getting your wages garnished for the rest of your life. Basically, that's the setup. So the bills aren't great. I mean, they do offer some protections, and I think maybe like I've heard of like maybe 2 people that like were able to qualify for the rent relief bill, but we still haven't heard anything about how many people. DHCR hasn't told us anything about how many people actually like got that relief. So to echo what Sia was saying, we have a lot, like we've got pretty much, except for a couple of CB8 electeds in that area, we've got pretty much everyone in central Brooklyn on these bills. Whether or not they're actually pushing for them in conference, and whether or not they're actually pushing, for them to go back to the session, that's a whole other question. And I think that it's going to unfortunately take them seeing what's happening. I speak with lawyers all the time, and they seem really stressed. Like I don't think that any of us expect it to be at this point in this process. Like, I don't think that I think we really thought that there would be at least like motivation to pass a moratorium. And there just doesn't seem to be like the push for that. Of course, Zellner, put the bill out. So that's our state senator in this area. But but I'm sure that he could use more support, you know, and more, you know, just more visibility, more people calling, you know, he can show a log of every time somebody's called or come into the office to the majority leader and say, my constituents need this to happen right now. And that makes a difference. Same with Diana. Diana's on the bill. I told her I have people calling her office. People are going to call her office. Like, we need to do that, because then she needs to be able to go to Carl Hastie and say, my people need this to happen, and you're going to make it happen. That's the way that we have to be able to use our elected officials to get, you know, what they're supporting us in doing. So, and they've done it before, so I know they can do it again. Let me go to the next. So the next slide is basically what Sia had already spoken about. The only added thing is the housing access voucher program, which was like pre-pandemic bill, but it basically is like our immediate solution for housing a whole lot of New Yorkers very quickly. Also a public health issue as well. So yes, Brooklyn eviction defense is the next slide. So I just want to talk briefly about how this came about and how it actually sort of like grew out of this neighborhood. So evictions have been occurring. Most of them are pretty foul, like landlord tricks, like throwing people's belongings out on the street, trying to change their locks, things that are illegal, and you know the police are supposed to take care of, but generally they stay out of it or they side with the landlord. So starting the summer, we started showing up to these things en masse, sometimes 50, sometimes 75, sometimes 100 people, and not letting it happen. And we noticed that like there was an uptick. Like the more the moratorium got extended, the more antsy landlords were getting about not getting their money, and they were sort of doing these like self-help evictions. You have to be taken to housing court. You can't just like lock somebody out. That's not allowed. And there's been a lot of support for that. We formed a group out of, so a little bit of the story, the Crown Heights Tenant Union was sort of the first tenant union in the Brooklyn area, at least. And over the course of the pandemic, there's been all sorts of neighborhood-wide unions that have sprouted up, like Bushwick Bedside Tenant Coalition, Sunset Park Tenant Union, Full-Time Tenant Union, Astoria Tenant Union. Like there's all sorts of tenant union now, which is amazing. We got together with those groups and also with Flatbush Tenant Coalition and a few other groups, and decided to start training for what we think is going to be this massive crisis of evictions. And so we did some trainings with tenants from across the country. We talked about how what actual legal evictions look like and how we might be able to prevent those. It's been a long time since that's happened in New York, but there is like a rich history and tradition of neighbors coming out and preventing marshals from taking them out of their homes, like physically blocking them and not letting them take them. It's kind of hard to like imagine, but this is it's gonna be what happens. Like the most vulnerable people are the first ones to get evicted. So we're talking about like, are there people that are willing to stand in front of an 80-year-old woman and prevent her from being evicted? Like I believe there are. And so we have created this network and this sort of like system to address both legal and illegal evictions, and the legal when they start happening. We don't know how that's going to go, honestly. We've done a lot of trainings. We've done a lot of talking about it, but like it's unfortunate because we really should not have gotten to this. Like this is a total failure of government at all levels. And yes, our champions always need love. I just read that. They do. This is, I think, for the neighborhood, something that we can sort of rally around in terms of whether it's homeowners or even like storefront people who are renting out a storefront that are not able to pay their rent right now, like we really have the ability to supersede a lot of like the divisions that we tend to have at like this community level, and just fight for one another and make sure that we're all still here in a year, you know? I feel like that's like an easy ask, even though like technically like eviction defense doesn't seem like an easy ask, but you know, like if we had this in 2008, like we might have been able to prevent a lot of the foreclosures that happened in the area, and the, you know, and evictions as well. So yeah, so this is I think in the resources section there will be like a the number and information for that, although I could also put it in the chat. Let me just and actually, like they've done a really good job with this website for Brooklyn Eviction Defense. It has pretty much any resources that you might need if you're facing eviction or if you want to get involved in eviction defense. We have people that can help you get onboarded to the system. Like if you have time and you want to just like be a part of this, like we'd love to have you. So yeah, so that's the broad overview of all that. Now, the way that I was sort of thinking that we would frame this is, that we would frame this as solutions to what this problem could be. Eviction defense is like the last ditch effort when everything else has failed. But prior to that, we have other things that we can do. So calling your electeds. I mean, I'm assuming most of you have either Diana or right now Walter, and starting in January, Farah, and then also Zellner, unless anybody's from CB8, but I don't think so. It's really important that they hear from you. You know, that it's amazing that like you would think that they're not that interested in hearing from like, you know, community board members, but they actually. Oh yeah, that tiny little section has Kevin Parker. Yeah, we were able to move Kevin Parker. He found out that we were going to march on his house from Target, and totally just like signed onto the bills like the next day. Like we didn't even have to do the action. He was terrified of the spectacle. So, you know, but you know, like that's what it's come down to now. Like we have to expect more from our electeds. We have to expect them not just to like get by, but we have to demand that they do what we're asking. And, you know, and when they don't, like we have to figure out a way to keep them accountable. That's my big like rallying cry for the next couple or 3 years of whatever it is I do here at the CB9 level is making sure to keep them accountable always. So all that said, you guys, you want to do questions maybe? That sound good for folks?
Yeah, sounds good.
You can just like chime in or raise your hand on the chat or however you want to do it. Anyone? Any questions? Yeah, sure. Absolutely. Non-eviction questions. Sure. We talk about eviction all day long. I'm ready for others. See, any tips for when the issue is a neighbor, not the landlord? Neighbor is a hoarder causing, okay, I've heard this sort of thing before, causing severe roach infestation. They refused extermination services in the past, and landlord doesn't seem to be able to do anything to fix the problem. So maybe one of the lawyers want to talk about like how this might be approached. Maybe.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Hannah, chime in if you at any time. Yeah, this is a really tough and very sad situation. I'm sorry that you're going through that, and I'm sorry that your neighbor has this hoarding problem, which is a very sad situation for them as well. I think the main thing that I would say is that your landlord is required to make sure that you don't have a roach problem in whatever means necessary. And so you still fund, even though it's the neighbor who's perhaps causing the problem, or at least that may be what your neighbor is claiming. Sometimes landlords say that it's not even necessarily true. your landlord still has an obligation to protect you from the roach problem, which doesn't necessarily mean anything against the neighbor actually. Like it could just mean that they seal up your apartment really well. Like if you have pretty good extermination in the building and they can seal up around the cracks and holes in your apartment and get you one of those little things that goes under your front door so that no roach can crawl under your front door, you should really be able to seal off your apartment from the roaches. I mean, I live in an old building with a perpetual like little roach problem, and like I'm sure many people perhaps can relate to that phenomenon, but so it's not like it's easy, but it's still doable, and that's something that can be done, and your landlord has to do it. So you can do any of the tactics to get repairs, calling 311, bringing your landlord to court to get those repairs done. And then ultimately, your landlord, in response to your action against them, would be, it would be their prerogative to take appropriate action against your hoarding neighbor if they felt like they needed to, which I, as a tenant lawyer, am never in favor of anybody bringing an eviction case. And so I'm not saying that that's like, a good outcome, but it could lead her perhaps to get services and, get the help she needs. If she was my client, I would certainly see to it that she got some help to try to overcome her hoarding problem. So, again, that's like not something I'm super comfortable. It's a sad situation all around, but the bottom line is your landlord can do a lot in your own apartment to prevent the roaches from coming in, and that they definitely absolutely have to make their efforts to do that.
Yeah, I would just add to that that does put you, which sort of Joanna sort of alluded to, is it puts you in a position where essentially you would have to testify against your neighbor if you went with your landlord. Because I've seen landlords use these situations like to their advantage and and try to get you to testify in a in a holdover proceeding, for example, against your neighbor. And I feel like there's other ways to get the outcome that you want. It could take some some digging to find out like who they know, if they maybe have if maybe there's people on your block, in your building, even within the community board that might have resources that might help. It's a tough one. Like it's not an easy situation, but I think anything that you can do to avoid getting into litigation, because then it's like giving your landlord a pretty easy like eviction at this point, and yeah, I agree. Like the sealing up of the baseboards and that sort of thing really actually makes a huge difference, and your landlord does have to do that. So yeah, so that's a tricky one though. Yeah, I feel bad for them too. Somebody asked about Mitchell Lama. Were you talking about the eviction stuff or the hoarding stuff? If it's about eviction stuff, Mitchell Lama would fall into the same. With the moratorium, yeah, eviction. The moratorium. So can somebody know like how that affects right now, Mitchell Lama, like what we have right now, or if it does or not? The 1 year would obviously cover everything. Like it would be any residential tenant. So, but do you guys know how any of these things are dealt with right now with?
Cooperators are like shareholder boards, the board that owns and manages the building, and the cooperation that owns and manages the building has to respect the same like eviction process as anybody. The thing is if you're a subletter, or depending on what's in like the bylaws, or depending on when the Mitchell Lama was built, like your lease just could be different, right? But you still have to you still can't be evicted by anybody but a judge. You still have to go to court. The Safe Harbor Act still applies.
Right. Every building has its own regulatory status or lack thereof, but the housing court still applies. Everybody has to go through the process. Landlords don't get to just snap their fingers and say you're out, no matter what type of building you live in New York.
even though they do all the time.
Even though they do all the time,
But
super illegally, but they're not technically allowed to.
that's why you gotta get organized with your neighbors. Like we have like a very robust legal system in New York, and we have that because we organized and won it. But so the main advice that I always like to tell anybody who's in the situation is like, if you get a threatening letter or phone call from your landlord, you don't listen to him without getting a second or third or fourth opinion. Him or her or them.
Yep.
Or
Today we actually went to court with a tenant. It was a brownstone up in CB8, and it was for an HP action for harassment and repairs. And we lined up with our CHTU shirts with a banner behind us, and like got onto like Microsoft Teams or whatever, and and the judge and the HPD person, they were like terrified. Like they literally defaulted just because they didn't want to have to wait on the attorney. Like they were just like, okay, yeah, default, like fine, you got it. Like it was amazing. Wow. And it was there was literally like 6 of us like just sitting on a stoop with like a like a little phone like shining on us, and we looked like we were in a courthouse. It was really funny. But like that's a powerful image to somebody who's been sitting and looking at like bobbleheads basically on the screen. So we got to get creative, and we got to do that stuff. This was an elderly woman who had defended her home like in 1985 from some sort of construction, and that they just continued to harass over like decades, and she was just over it. So so we filed one through we filed an HP case through Just Fix, and that actually turned out really great. Yeah. So so it makes a difference. Plus, like there's obviously other benefits to organizing your neighbors. Like there's you'll feel safer in your place. You'll be able to have conversations with somebody about something like hoarding without having to make it like if you have those conversations ahead of time, if you have those before things get crazy. I mean, things are already kind of crazy, but yeah. So anybody else have questions? Anything housing or pandemic related, since you have such an incredible panel? I'm just kidding. I'm here all the time. Anybody?
Last call for questions. If anybody has any questions, please ask them we're now. I want to make sure we're respectful of everybody's time. So if there are, yes, Michael, what's your question?
Yeah, so I have a question for both Esteban and Sia, who I don't know. I don't know either one. I have a question for them. What can regular folks who are on this call, who are on this Zoom call, or who may view it later, what can we do to help push our legislature to pass our bills?
I can start, and then Esteban, you should weigh in. Nice to meet you, Mike. So I think that I said it earlier in the chat. I mean, like, we are blessed in this part of Brooklyn to have elected officials who were elected right out of the tenant movement, right? Senator Myrie and Soon Farah and Assemblywoman Richardson all were elected without taking real estate money, and they are probably more on our side than anyone else in the state legislature. That doesn't mean that we can't like show them some love. I mean, I think it can be very, ultimately Carl and Andrea are making decisions in the state legislature. Carl Hastie and Andrea are cousins, and they are not in session right now. The legislature is not in session right now. And so like, I think that the most important thing is to make it clear in public and in the district that like we need action, because that's going to be like the fuel that Diana and Zelnor need, and that Farah will need to say to Carl and Andrea, like, if you don't go back into session, like my ass is on the line, like they need people in their district organizing. So that's like the first thing. And then the second thing, it's related to the first thing, which is like, organize in the district, protests at the building level, make the evictions very visible, like flyer the hell out of this entire neighborhood saying like, I am being evicted and I refuse to do that. And then the second thing that I'm going to see if I can drop this in the chat. This is a proposal that is in development. So you're getting this is a draft. I'll give you all a little preview.
I haven't even seen this.
Yeah, no, this is new. We're going to unveil this tomorrow in our organizing working group call. But the reality is that across the state, elected officials and the media just do not believe that evictions are happening. And so like, it's actually really easy. We've made it very easy for our assembly members and senators to say, you know, Cuomo told me that there's an eviction moratorium, like you should be good. And so we need to confront that. We need to confront that crisis, and we need to repeatedly confront the eviction pipeline that is starting back up. So I think the example of going to folks' stoop is really, really important, but we really want to start sharing the eviction stories. So like, you know, earlier on the comms call, somebody called this like an eviction diary. We want people to say, if you get a 14-day notice from your landlord, take a picture of it, share it on your social media, and use the hashtag #StopMyEviction, whatever. Like we just need to make evictions very, very, very visible, which is hard because people feel shame about eviction. But under COVID-19 and it's never your fault if you're being evicted. And people sort of know that. So there's a lot of steps to just like really think about how we can start making this eviction crisis very public. So even our champions have to fight back. And then, you know, I guess that's it. Esteban.
I mean, yeah. I mean, I think that we could also, you know, these are things that like every community does a little differently. Like we know Zellner and Diana. Like I feel like, you know, the kind of relationship we have with Zellner, for example, is like is active. We were active in like even like the you know the introduction of this moratorium bill, for example, because we wanted no filings, and we weren't sure that was something that was happening, and so we just made sure that he knew that we wanted no filings, and he, you know, is always happy to meet with us. And like you have to be proactive in these situations, and I feel like there are things we could do even at the level of like committees like land use and housing. We can do town halls. We can do you know, a session where we just talk with, you know, with these electeds about what I feel like they don't talk to this crowd as much as they do like the people that are constantly like dealing with legislation and like and just in the tenant movement in general. Like a phone call from one of you on the committee might actually like be significant to them. I know for Diana it is, like when she hears from people from the community board, because she was on the community board and this is her, you know, this is her turf, like she wants to hear from us. So you know, always remembering that they've done right by us at this point, and we just need them to be doing even more right, I guess is how I would put it. So yeah, does that answer your question, Mr. Hollingsworth?
Yeah, it does.
Yes, thank you very much.
Cool. Oh, we just got Zoom bombed.
Damn.
Yeah, I think it's the troll.
Damn.
It looks like trolls.
Man, I've never been Zoom bombed before.
Mr. Gyron. Mr. Gyron.
Wow.
I've been Zoom bombed before. Like fuck. He always said, "But show me that hairy cock."
I've never been Zoom bombed before either.
Accidentally removed Michael. I apologize. I was trying to get everybody.
Yo, Alejandro transgender too. We're
It's Lydia.
twinsies.
It's Lydia and
Yeah, fuck niggers.
Mayna and
Oh, boy.
Wendy.
Okay,
We got Lydia Alejandra. I think, no, Mina, is that Mina Lagut, the board member?
Yeah,
Yes.
Okay,
that's
sorry,
me.
Mina.
I apologize to everyone about that. I am so sorry. We were worried about this and we made it through the entire presentation. And then it happened again.
Right.
Wow, this is crazy. It's never happened to me before.
They sounded like they were having fun, but I mean, like that was That woke me up.
Yeah.
Where's your computer screen? It always looks like you're looking up.
Me?
Yeah.
Oh, it's like a separate camera. It's not like a laptop. So
Oh, so you can like.
yeah, I can like. That was crazy. Oh, I guess Michael got logged off. Huh.
I accidentally kicked him because I was trying to, there was like a lot of them joining on. Because
And he's a little cartoon, so.
we were supposed to have a waiting room and I think I accidentally disabled it earlier. And that's how they got all of them so quickly.
That was wild. No
Yeah.
worries.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're still trying to join the waiting room. So they're just.
Oh, they really?
Yeah, but I think that keeps removing them. It's
Okay, well, again, I apologize. I'm so sorry for all of that. But if there aren't any other questions, I think that's a good time to end it. It's 8:30.
It's the most exciting Zoom meeting I've had.
I know, seriously.
Way to wake up the monotony. Like that's.
Yes. I'll have to send a message to Michael after and apologize for accidentally kicking him. Thank you so much, Hannah, Joanna, Esteban, and Sia. This was a wonderful panel. We'll definitely cut out the last little bit. But thank you so much. And I think without, I don't think there's any other committee business we need to do. So I think with that being said, I think we can go ahead and call an end to the meeting.
All right. Good night, everybody.
Thank you all so
Good
much.
night.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Good night.